So
All
yeah,
right.
tell me about Bratislava in the background there.
Bratislava, yes, so Bratislava in the background, my hometown. It's on the Danube River and very close to Vienna. A lot of people don't know that. It's only about a half hour or 45 minutes maybe from Vienna. So, and a very nice town, capital of Slovakia. So that's where I'm from. That's my hometown.
That's great. I've always wanted to do one of those river cruises along the Danube
Yes.
River. Have you ever done it or anything?
No,
No.
no, but that would be fun. And some of them, it's funny because some of the cruises do stop in Bratislava. So I think it's becoming more popular because of those river cruises. We have a lot of tourists from that, but some of them don't even stop there. They just keep going. Like they go through some of the bigger cities like Vienna and they miss Bratislava, which I think is a pity because it's a very nice town.
I would love to do that. I would love to do that. So one of our episodes would be on the cruise. On the
Exact Oh, that would be so fun. I know, with our international background. But yeah, so what about you? Where are you from? Or like what city are you from?
I'm from Sofia. So
Sofia.
yeah,
Okay, so
just Bulgaria further down the Danube
yeah,
River.
very good.
Um, so yeah, just growing up in communism there, but moved away when I was 17, just like you did.
Yes, yes, I know. Yeah, so we'll talk about it a little bit more. We have these similar backgrounds that are not so similar, but in some ways we have some similarities. So, but we're excited about this new venture, potentially a conversation that will keep evolving, maybe between the two of us. So, yeah, so I'm just going to say hi. I'm Daniela and
And I'm Lina, and
Lina. Yes,
it's
and
really nice
well,
to connect.
yeah, it's great to connect, and we're calling this the integration lens. And there's a reason for that name that we picked. And yeah, so we're very excited about this conversation. And we met kind of not that long ago, right? How many months ago was it that we met?
Just not even a couple months ago in
Couple
London.
months. I know, in London at a certification training for the Enneagram assessment, which was really fun. But we really hit it off there. We found out that we had a lot in common, including our backgrounds. And we both live in the United States, even though we're not from here, and we don't live on the same coasts. So we do have some time difference between us anyway,
Yeah.
but it's still easier to connect if one of us was in Europe and one here. So we're both in the United States. So it's really fun to connect and really fun to start this conversation.
I really love the name that you picked, the integration lens. It just puts everything into perspective. And I think, perspective is what we're talking about. So the name is just perfect.
Yes, I think I'm really into language and how language really orients you around meaning. And I think that is important for specifically for this podcast potentially, because we're talking from a very specific perspective about development and leadership development and personal growth. That's what we're hoping to be discussing here. And that's both of our backgrounds. So we're both coaches in some capacity and have, again, come from very different worlds, if you will. So we can talk about that a little bit of how we actually each got here. But so how about you, Lina? You have a very interesting background. So I would love for you to introduce that.
Well, I'll give you the short version. Again, growing up in Bulgaria, didn't have a lot of opportunities there, but always kind of had this drive to create a better life. Figured out at a very young age, at a time that not a lot of information was available, but through it's almost like when you have that desire, the universe conspires on your behalf. I had a pen pal from Cyprus who gave me a tip that American universities give athletic scholarships. So I came to the US to play volleyball, and then I studied biology. Once I graduated, I moved to San Diego, started working in a very traditional lab. Biotech industry here is really big, and I had these dreams of becoming getting my PhD, becoming a scientist. But the summer that I moved here, the Olympics were on, and I was sitting on my couch watching the Olympics on TV, and beach volleyball came on as an Olympic sport. And I thought, "Well, that looks really cool. I wanna do that." And little by little, just from again, from having that, um desire inside, figured out a plan, and together with my little sister, just in the next 4 years, without a lot of resources or support or coaching even, figured out how to learn this new sport and, qualified and played in the Olympics, and that became my career for a little bit, for, quite a few years, played in a 2nd Olympics, and then after that, worked into the corporate world a little bit, and became a mom, started a family. So over the last 20 years, that's what I've been dedicated to. But as the kids were growing, I felt there's more that I feel that I carry inside of me, and little by little started figuring out that these different things that I felt like I was doing, almost like the spokes of a wheel, of a bike wheel. Here I was growing up in Bulgaria, playing indoor volleyball, being a scientist, playing beach volleyball, being a mom. It didn't feel like they were connected in a lot of ways. But once I discovered coaching, presenting, and working with corporate clients, especially, um, everything just came into focus, and it was just this the coaching united all these different spokes into the wheel, and kind of like the vehicle of what how I see is useful and what I can contribute to society today. So that's my story in a nutshell. How about you?
Gosh,
How did you get
yeah.
here?
I know. I find it so fascinating because I feel so much bravery in that and this ability to just kind of immerse yourself in things without fear and following some of your instincts, really. And obviously having to have a lot of discipline, an ability to have grit. I really feel that from you. And so, and I view kind of my story a little bit differently, even though also I left to the United States at the age of 17. I first came as an exchange student in high school. And because I felt like I couldn't learn English at school, like I was really struggling learning the language in school. And I thought, well, that's the only way I'm going to learn it is if I go to the US. And so
Mhm,
it was and that was an impulsive decision on my end. I was not a very impulsive or brave young person or child, I would say. But I think that really did start something for me. It gave me this belief that I can do hard things, and I
mm,
can actually do something that I set my mind to. Kind of surprise myself, and then it led to me, wanting to study abroad because I wanted to study in English. I wanted to use the language, and so I pursued, all of my higher education in the United States, and then later in Scotland for my master's, and but very much pursued education for the sake of education. I really didn't know what I wanted to do with it. And that is a little bit my story, and maybe also what now informs a little bit my work because of this understanding that I actually didn't have a lot of self-understanding or maybe self-knowledge
mhm,
or maybe even some sense of self-permission. And a little bit of it was cultural, obviously, where we come from, but a little bit of it was also personality. I'm assuming personality based, and but you know eventually, later in life is, when I actually decided to pursue my doctorate in organizational leadership, and that was another one of those kind of instinctual steps that, I took later in life after working in different, areas, in higher education a little bit, but just really never finding my way. And so through doing the doctorate in organizational leadership, I really started to be interested in adult learning and understanding what helps us develop. I started to reflect on my life and a lot of my international experiences and how they informed, how I grew as a person. And I really focused on kind of the understanding of global leadership development because I had this sense that and maybe again, you can tell me if you feel this as well, is, living internationally and studying internationally, you get the sense that there is there are these differences between us, right? There are differences between different cultures and different countries, and yet there's some just inherent similarities. Like there's this human experience that we all share, and I think I wanted to kind of understand that better. Like,
Mhm,
what is it about us that we all share? And somewhat in my research, I was pursuing that knowledge. I wanted to see, oh, do we all learn the same way? Do we all grow kind of the same way, or are there differences? Are there cultural differences? And that was my what my doctorate was focused on. And really, after that is when I got into leadership development and coaching, and I've been doing that for the past 5 years. And it's just become, I think, more and more clear to me as I started to work with clients, where I was seeing gaps
mhm.
and where I was seeing, even for myself, what was needed and maybe what wasn't necessarily offered in the leadership development space. And that really is what eventually led me to developing my own framework for growth and development. And also what then led me to the Enneagram certification because of that integration focused, um, of assessment, I guess, the Enneagram, and people may not be familiar with it. We'll talk about it maybe a little bit, definitely in the future. But it's one of those psychometric assessments that can be really useful, especially when you're looking at growth and development from the integration perspective.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about your framework, that you have noticed and developed, um, and I see in both of our stories something really interesting happening, following those instinctual desires that we think, this is whatever the motivation has been for each of us, and I think that relates to a lot of people too. Understanding on a deeper level, like once you go through an arc of an experience, for example, whether you talk about your educational experience and understanding what motivated you to pursue it, or,
Mhm.
in my case, just deciding I want to be a professional beach volleyball player, what motivated me to pursue that? I think once you start going into the Enneagram work,
Mhm.
and this is why I'm so excited
Yeah.
to bring that into kind of like the tools that I
Mhm.
have with my clients, because inevitably in every coaching conversation, we bump up against personality, and not just personality, but more specifically the blind spots
Mhm.
about our personality. So understanding, well, where did that drive come from? For me, that was a pivotal question because of the pursuit was so difficult. There were
Yeah.
so many opportunities to quit along the way. Obviously, when you say, oh, I want to be an Olympian, well, many people want to be an Olympian. But when you start doing the steps to become an Olympian, you see very quickly that I think it's something like 0.0002% or something, like a very small portion
Yeah.
of the population actually becomes an Olympian. And I think that's when you start bumping into, okay, it sounds like a great idea. You think it's going to be fun, but there's going to be a lot of effort that you have to put into, and time and money. And so what's going to make it worthwhile? That's when I started digging into, like, what is behind this motivation? Why did I think it was a good idea? W- Because the first results were not so positive. My sister and I ended up losing miserably in our first international event and having to sleep on park benches, because we didn't have enough money or a credit card to extend our hotel stay. So why did I keep going back? And I think this is where the Enneagram offers so many opportunities to explore those personal development, personality avenues that I'm so excited to talk about.
I know, and I want to hear more about that drive because, again, I think it's something that I am a little bit envious of that I always maybe struggled to access within myself. And so I really love hearing about it, and I know that it showed up in other areas of your life as well. I'm sure, and has really shaped who you are in general as a person, right? And I am also, I think this is the key about the Enneagram as a tool is that really it speaks to the underlying motivations of kind of our behaviors or how we show up in the world that we don't have language for. So it's very difficult to access that information because sometimes we can't even put words to it. And so this is where the Enneagram becomes so useful. But, I think for me, I started to understand fairly quickly, and maybe it is also a bias of me wanting to understand people more deeply because I felt like I wanted to be understood more deeply, as I moved to the different countries and, we can talk about that and adaptability and having to adapt. But I think I understood that mm, there's depth to us that if we don't access that depth, it is very difficult to create sustainable growth. And I
Mhm.
was seeing that with corporate clients. I was seeing that with personal, coaching clients. I was seeing it with myself that there were obviously there are so many frameworks for growth and development. However, often they are either time limited, meaning, you only have an engagement, whether it's a corporate client or individual client for so many months, or even just a workshop. And a lot of people gain a lot of insight about themselves during these engagements and even coaching engagements, even when they go for 6 months or 12 months. However, it's often not sustainable, that the insight is not enough or it has not been enough. And I know that was the case for me as well. I'm pretty introspective and always thought that I was fairly self aware. And yet I was still kind of bumping into myself, if you will, in different areas of my life. And, eventually I realized that, okay, so we have this internal architecture that really shapes and orients us in the world. It orients our behaviors and impacts how we show up, impacts how we can grow. And so that's what led me to creating this framework. And it took a while. There were all these pieces from adult learning theory, from transformative learning, from neuroscience. Like, I'm just super interested about how the brain works, Um, so for understanding all these different frameworks, I developed what I call now the architecture of self-leadership.
Mm.
And a couple of things that I feel like are kind of the pillars of that framework. Well, one is that we have these internal structures that we really, without understanding those internal structures deeply and understanding the motivators and some of the assumptions that really drive our behaviors, it is very difficult to create some kind of meaningful shift in certain areas of our lives. And also I was running into this language of change versus, creating change. We want to change behaviors, we want to optimize, we want to fix. And this is very much the language that you hear in corporate world, I think, is like, what does leadership mean and who is a leader and what kind of, skills and attributes should they have? And I was a little bit uncomfortable with it. I kind of felt that everyone had the access to be a good leader, and often that it was the capacity maybe that they just have not reached within themselves that didn't allow them to step fully into their leadership. So I created the architecture of self leadership from that perspective that we need to understand ourselves deeply, right? These internal structures, but also that it is a practice that, our development or self leadership is a practice rather than like an one off thing that we do and then suddenly we know everything about ourselves and we can move forward in this like more whatever optimized way, right?
Yeah. And I guess we kind of buried the lead here because this is the topic of
Yes.
today's discussion. Today, we're talking about change versus integration.
Yes.
Eh, But very specifically, can you just repeat what you said about integration? How do you see integration?
For me, integration is a way of expanding our own capacity So not changing something and not necessarily changing behaviors or who we are, but expanding our ability to access our growth edges and really step more fully into who we are. And through that, be aligned with our own internal values and be actually able to not only access our great gifts, but really leverage them and understand where some of our tendencies may be holding us back, but not fighting against them, but working with them.
Yeah.
And I think that is really an inherent different way of looking at growth. But yeah, tell me about your
Yeah.
perspective of what integration means to you.
Well, I'll just make a comment about what you said first, because I think when I read your piece on Substack about
Mm.
this change versus integration, what attracted me to the subject so strongly is how clearly you articulate the connection between when we think about change, there is a part of our selves, behaviors, whatever it may be, that we believe that is wrong that we have to fix. And in the process, deny that part of us. And what integration implies is to take all the learnings, see it in a more holistic way. And I'll give you a very practical, like what the first thing that came to mind was from my athletic background. You know, this is what we do. Like when you're learning a new skill. So in my 20s, I had to learn this new sport. I had played volleyball before, but beach volleyball, anybody can tell you when you try it, it's one of the most difficult things to manage, just because of the elements, and you don't have six people around you. You only have two. You have to figure
Yeah.
out everything on your own. When you see a strategy, or when you find a strategy that works, and we had to do this really, really quickly because we had this hugely ambitious goal: qualify for the Olympics, starting from scratch. The first 2 years were really spent on, we weren't, I was working full time. My sister was in school full time. We didn't even have the time to train. And so in the last 2 years, we only had a certain number of tournaments that were available to us. So we had to very quickly figure out what works, what doesn't, and grow in exponentially almost. I
Yeah.
remember that with only a few months left in the Olympic qualification process. So when we started the final year of the preparation, with only 2 months left in the Olympic qualification process, we had figured certain things out. We had made it to number 73 in the world, but that wasn't good enough. That wasn't going to qualify us for the Olympics. If we wanted to be in the Olympics, we had to be in the top 23. So there were 50 other teams that were ahead of us in the ranking, and only 2 months of time. So there was a lot of limitations, and what I'm trying to say here is that change and growth had to happen really fast.
Mhm.
So there was, of course, this excitement when I found a new strategy that worked, a certain way to score a point, that I would do it. And it brought me success initially. But then, of course, I was doing a lot of scouting of the other teams. They were doing a lot of scouting of us. Eventually, teams would catch on to it. And if
Mm.
I wasn't on the lookout for how do I continue to evolve, then it would become a limitation. So I think that's the very practical application of what you're talking about, is when we come to our edge,
Mhm.
how do I not drop that strategy entirely, because there are still moments when I can rely on it. It has served me very well in the past,
Mhm.
but how do I start discerning, when do I use it? When do I save it for later?
Mhm.
Maybe when's a situation that it's not appropriate at all and I need to drop it.
Yes.
That, to me, brings what we're talking about to life. Just
Yes.
from an athletic standpoint, you can see how those dots connect.
I know,
Um,
and I find it's so fascinating to me because I'm not, I didn't play any team sports, especially team sports, even though I think, beach volleyball has a lot of individual agency there because there are only two of you on a team. But yeah, I think, we talk about this like gift over extension dynamic, right? And I really think that you know, a lot of times when we think about change or how we need to optimize something or fix something, we're looking at the overextension of our gifts at in action.
What do you mean by that? Like, when you say overextension of the gifts, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so, I think, again, as part of kind of our internal architecture, it's kind of like two sides of a coin, right? A lot of times our tendencies or our patterns are grounded in gifts that have served us, right? They're adaptive strategies that we adopted as very young that served us and really got us to where we are. But if you just try to override it, you are essentially overriding a little bit your gifts as well. So you are not in alignment with yourself. You are then not able to exploit more of your gifts because you abandon some of it for the sake of that short term change.
Right. Right,
So,
I can see, when you say it's a practice, obviously, in the sports world, we understand that very well. You go to practice every day, you have a coach that's there. Those are things that are given in sports. It's
yes.
a little bit more difficult. I think in the corporate world, especially when you get to the higher levels of management, that's very well accepted too.
Mhm,
But it is a bit of a stretch in our everyday lives
mhm,
to think about our choices on a daily basis. How do we what are the practices that would support us to make better choices, to have access to more choices? Because a lot of times when we get in trouble is when we see the world or our situation and we only see one way of
mhm.
reacting to this situation. So, how do we support ourselves? And I think this is where the architecture of self leadership, like this is, that deep understanding of yourself can really guide and inform what are these practices that
Mhm.
can support you when you're faced with a choice to see more of a possibility.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the idea is to deepen our own awareness and then keep working with that awareness. And you use the word discernment. I think that's a huge part of it, right? There's intentionality and discernment that we take with us in the everyday life rather than letting ourselves run on autopilot. Which I think often is what happens to us because life gets busy, and I mean, and that is the default way. A lot of us did not grow up with understanding that there is actually an ability to grow and expand our own capacity. I don't know if you grew up with any messages like that, but I sure didn't. It was kind of this is how you are, and this is what you'll be doing, and this is the type of work that you'll be doing, and those are your options.
Yeah, growth and exploration was not necessarily encouraged.
Not
But,
encouraged.
conform and
Exa- exactly,
be in that
exactly.
certain role.
Yeah.
Um, so I can see how that shows up. And I think giving a couple of examples here will be very useful, but I can see how that shows up, in family dynamics, even just in relationships. I can see how that shows up in work life, especially when we start feeling external pressures. So that's when some of those mm, tendencies, if we're not aware of them, can start showing up and sort of skewing what possibilities are there for us. And I think the goal here with what we're talking about integration is to widen the horizon of our possibilities, even in a moment when we feel under pressure, under stress.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's why a lot of us at some point of our lives start to run into those patterns. And I always say our tendencies serve us until they don't.
Mhm.
Because when capacity lowers, when we are under a lot of stress, life gets busy, those adaptive strategies actually end up causing us a lot more problems than maybe serving us. And if we don't understand them, if we don't have compassion for where they're coming from, it's very difficult to actually live in the present and try to live more intentionally. So we end up on that autopilot, end up a lot of times living from a very reactive place and just kind of responding to life rather than living intentionally. And I do think that we inherently start feeling it, that something is off. We ran out of juice, if you will. And
Mhm,
it
mhm.
and it's another, aspect of the architecture of self-leadership is that this shows up in all domains of our lives. This is not limited to the business environment. Like you said, it impacts our relationships, it impacts our friendships and how we navigate even the spiritual world. And I think when we work kind of with those internal structures, when we start to understand ourselves better, we start to understand others better as well. And it allows us to have this deeper sense of self belonging and less of a need to try to earn our place to fit in.
Mhm.
And I just think that's such a important aspect of getting to a place where we're living more in alignment with who we are and more in alignment just kind of with humanity, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a huge topic, I think, for many people in the world, especially someone that has a similar background like us, growing up in another country, moving. The world has become so much more accessible. I think we find this mobility um, produces a lot of opportunities for people. And at one point, we find ourselves with this innate yearning to be a part of something bigger, a part of our community in a very meaningful way. And it could be very alienating if you look outside yourself and you expect that you will find this warm welcome and it doesn't come. So, what's happening here is just like when we talk about change or wanting to see something different in our environment, I'll give you something like this example. When you wake up in the morning, you go and you brush your teeth and you go to fix your hair. Well, all of us do that every day. Well, as a busy mom, some days, you kinda skip it, but but, if you're on a daily basis, you go and if you see, like, "Okay, my hair is messy and I wanna fix it," you don't go to the mirror and you
Yeah.
start, like, changing, like, there's not even something you can touch in the mirror in that
Yeah.
image that you can change to see how this would look different. You go to yourself and you adjust it, and then you say, "Okay, now this is good enough. This is what I wanna see." Well, that's exactly what we're talking about here with this idea of finding belonging first within yourself and then looking to experience it in your surrounding. But it's
Mhm.
very, very counterintuitive, and I think it also brings into question a lot of our patterns, and it comes with a lot of wisdom. And
Yes.
so the idea of finding self-belonging requires us to understand more about ourselves. So tell me how the architecture of self-leadership could support learning more about how to find, even in just this moment, like this self-belonging.
Yeah, so I think, I always start, and this is where the Enneagram is really helpful because the architecture of self leadership kind of gives you this process of exploring yourself more deeply. Something like the Enneagram gives you the map because it can more quickly give you language and kind of understanding of your own patterns. But really, the idea is that if we start to understand both our patterns and really what drives them, what are some of the main drivers of our tendencies, we have these identity commitments we're not aware of, these kind of never absolutes that are operating in the background
Mhm,
that are really orienting our behaviors a certain way. And unless we become aware of them, it is very difficult to shift that pattern or even expand kind of that capacity that we're talking about. And so, trying to identify what are some of these identity commitments that I created early on that are part of often of my implicit memory, right? It's not something that I'm aware of. And they're also driven by some deeper assumptions I have about the world and how I assign meaning to things. So there is a way to work with clients, obviously, to get to some of those answers. So then they can again have that understanding and compassion for themselves, like, oh, of course, this is what I do.
mhm,
Of course, it makes complete sense. Like this was in my service.
mhm,
And it's just because we're in this earning world, you keep earning, 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 right?
Mhm.
So you can earn more of whatever value, self-worth, connection, whatever it is that you're trying to get, right? And then once you have that understanding and have that compassion, then you can say, but now I get to discern. The choice kind of appears in front of you, and that choice is much more accessible. And then keep practicing these new ways of being, that expanded way of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, I would say.
Right.
It's just kind of a little bit of an oxymoron, but it really is. And it has to be a practice, because if you do it once, that nervous system, that implicit memory is so strong, it will just snap us back into our old patterns like a rubber band, that you
Yep.
stretch, stretch, stretch and just snaps back.
That's, here's an exercise that I do when I do corporate presentations, with clients, but I do this exercise where I have everyone just write down what is your dream in different categories. You have family, you have travel, you have your career, you have your sort of legacy or whatever it may be in your community, and just no limitation. Whatever comes to mind, we do it very quickly, and move on from one to the next, because we don't want to give time for the brain to start thinking, oh, well, is this possible? Is it not possible? Of course, this is unrealistic. No, just
Mhm.
writing down whatever comes out in the moment as a dream, when we call a dream. And then once we have that, everybody writes it down. Then I invite someone to share it. And
Mhm.
inevitably, you know what happens in those moments? There's complete silence.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to raise their hand, because here they are having to reveal this internal world. Here and there, people will raise their hand, but um, by far, the highest percentage, maybe 9 out of 10 people, would have some concern about voicing their inner dreams out into, especially if it's a corporate setting. Let's say,
Mhm.
these are, well, my boss is over here. Of course, I'm not going to say what what is my dream, or what do I want. And so this question, though, is designed specifically to catch that
Mhm.
internal dialogue
That chatter.
that we have, and it's running in the back of our minds 24/7,
Mhm.
sometimes even when we're asleep.
Y Yes.
Those messages that we have internalized is what you're talking about. So catching that internal dialogue is one of the first steps.
Yes.
But you have to shake it. You have to, because very quickly after the first thought, so I'll give you an example. I wanted to write a book. Well, immediately I had 3 other thoughts. "Oh, who do you think you are? Now you want to be an author. Oh,
Mhm.
how are you gonna find time? You have 3 kids. You don't even have time to look in the mirror some days." Or, you need time and resources, and you don't know the right people, so that immediately starts popping up in my mind. Now, if I don't catch it in that moment, if I don't catch these, the mind would start finding other justifications to
Yes.
reinforce those beliefs. And so, what I think you're talking about here is having a practice that interrupts that behavior at any one of these points, so
Mhm.
that my dream of writing a book, I find more options rather than closed doors.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful example. And it's definitely about the noticing, right? I call them well-meaning friends, these voices. I said they're well-meaning friends, they really will mean well. They're very loyal, very insistent, because they're trying to protect you from something. They're trying to protect you from failure. Right? So if you do this, then there's a potential that you fail. And if you fail, and then we go back to some of the deeper assumptions that we hold. So it's both noticing, but also really developing understanding, where are these well-meaning friends coming from? What are these adaptive strategies? And then, how is that impacting me and really limiting me from my full expression, like in your case? And then instead of saying, well, I'm just going to push through, is more of like, okay, of course, I understand that, but I get to choose. I get to discern. I get to keep choosing every day. I would say this is also where the Enneagram comes in. kind of helping us understand where some of this is coming from.
Yeah.
So I think this is going to be such a rich conversation, and I really want to talk about the Enneagram when we have more time or in our next episode, because I think introducing the Enneagram is interesting. And there really is even neuroscience now behind a lot of this information. So we have true science and data that supports this integrative way of looking at development. And the more tools we can have, the more conversations we can have, I think the better for our clients and for the audience that's interested in personal growth and development.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I have a tremendous example from a client that works for one of the top companies in the world, but the knowledge and the tools from the Enneagram really came into play there to shake up some of those old beliefs, and it went from being demoted to and the a whole team being taken away from him to um, facing the situation, being in a lot of turmoil for a couple of months, but facing the situation with a different attitude, with a different and wider perspective that resulted into not just another promotion, regaining of a team, but even creating a better situation that he ever thought was possible. But so that's directly an example of how this comes into play into real life. And I can't wait to talk to you about it.
Yes, me too. Me too. And I think I'll just make one more point about the Enneagram, but is that it's really about showing us this box that we may be in rather than telling us who we are or putting us in some kind of a box, right? So it's actually a way out and way through for us to grow. So it is definitely a tool for development, not just for typing or for some kind of a description of tendencies or patterns. But yes, I can't wait to continue this conversation. I think there's so much to talk about, but I'm very excited about this integration lens perspective and look forward to continuing the conversation for sure.
Me too. So good to talk to you, Daniela.
Great to talk to you, too, Lina. All right, see you soon.
See you soon.